How much do you know about the Bible?
Think of me as a curious spectator on this particular episode, a very ignorant layman who's just in it for the funsies. I know very little about the Bible. Admittedly, I have read the thing twice. The last time that I read it, however, I might have been 17. So it's been over a decade, 13 years since, almost 14 now, since I've read the thing.
Obviously, it didn't take.
No, it didn't take.
For those of you who don't know, Dr. Josh has a PhD in Assyriology and a bachelor's in religion. Is that religious studies, or was it just called religion?
It's just religion.
Okay. Well, that's very broad, and
Thank you.
I assume that I assume that puts you a leg up over my co-host K-lub, who read the Bible, but it didn't take, and he doesn't understand it. So you're going to tell us about it, because we're both atheists, and we need a walkthrough. Me less than K-lub, but I'm sure you probably know a lot of nuance that I don't. A lot of us think that we know the Bible, and then we run across a weird passage like Ezekiel 25:17, and we're like, what the hell? I've never read this before, So you're going to unpack that for us. How did you, first of all, why did you write this book?
Yeah, it kind of has to do with why I came on social media or YouTube in the first place. I guess it was back in late 2017. I started watching Aaron Ra videos where he was debating Kent Hovind, and just sort of for fun. And then I started watching other videos by him, and I heard him having conversations with apologists that were making claims about, the Hebrew in the Old Testament says this, or, this is an ancient Near Eastern thing. And I just thought time and again, like, it's not really true. The Hebrew doesn't say that. That's not what that means. So after I heard, many of those smaller instances, I emailed Aaron directly, and of course he gets so many emails. Nothing came of it. Anyway, I ended up ultimately on the Non Sequitur show, and talking about my PhD from Johns Hopkins and what I do and what I did, and ultimately got back in contact with Aaron. Anyway, the point was that I found that more and more, while it may sound strange, probably not to everybody listening, atheists, in my opinion, get bullied quite a bit. And one of the main reasons that they get bullied is because they'll bring up what I consider to be very legitimate objections to the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament. And one of the main pushbacks, one of the main sort of bullying tactics that I hear is, what's the context of that passage? Do you know
We're taking it out of context?
Yeah. And the problem is that if I say this in the book, like, you don't need to know, for example, all the details of the Book of Enoch and the story of the Watchers in order to say that God drowning the entire world in a flood is a bad thing, right? You don't need to have those details to be able to say that.
And just for context, the Book of Enoch that's not in the Bible, is it?
No, it's
this is an apocryphal book.
Yeah, it's a later Second Temple text. Yeah, and it develops certain aspects of that Genesis 6 story and sort of expands it out in greater detail. But it's more complicated than that. But you don't need to know what's the other thing that I say? You don't need to know all of the adoption practices from the city of Nuzi in the second millennium, in Mesopotamia, to know that owning another person as property is wrong, right? But the thing is, so often, and the big passage that I always hear is 1 Samuel 15, right? God commands Saul to go and to kill all the Amalekites down to like infants, suckling infants. And immediately it's like, what's the context? Who are the Amalekites? Where'd they come from? Why is God doing this?
Who gives a shit?
Yeah, well, that's right. That's the response. But the problem is, an atheist can be in a debate or discussion can be very easily just sort of dismissed,
right or
wrong. if they can't come up with a context, because the Christian apologist is like, well, I mean, you don't even know the context. How can you speak to this?
Right. And hopefully for the Christian apologist's sake, they're really good and really understand the Bible, because I used to be a Christian apologist and I would use that tactic all the time. And usually it would work without question, but for the fact that you occasionally run into an atheist who knows the Bible better than you, and they know the context and you don't, and then you're fucked.
Yeah.
Right. And good luck, Christian apologists.
Well, honestly, that's what this book is meant to do. Like that's its point. Its point is to, I went to seminary at Capital Bible Seminary, and their motto was equipping world changers, I think is what it was. But it was all about equipping. So they're all their brochures, and always people climbing mountains with all this gear hanging from them. And so it was all about equipping them to do something.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's actually a really good representation of what the purpose of this book is. It's meant to equip specifically an atheist or a skeptic who is interested in having these types of debates and discussions, either here online or, at Thanksgiving dinner, with that family member that's going to come at you. And you just want to have the information to be able to say, look, you have this backwards, please don't bother me with this. That's what the book is meant to do, to arm you to be able to engage in a meaningful way, hopefully in a way that, what elevates the discourse, as I hear so often online.
So let me get this straight. You went to seminary so that they could arm you with professing the gospel of Christ, presumably. And then you wrote a book so that you could arm atheists in how to defeat that gospel, or at least defeat the arguments made by the people professing this gospel. Is that right?
Yeah. I mean, I think that's one way to sum it up.
How did that happen?
Yeah, that's a fair question. So I got my master's in theology, which was like their big 6-year degree. And I got it in Old Testament studies. So like I took, I think, 5 years of Hebrew. I taught Hebrew to graduate students for 2 years while I was there.
So you are a legit biblical scholar then. Like I think that would safely qualify you as a Bible scholar if you have.
Yeah. I mean, I'm always tenuous, hesitant to use that, just because I know like people like Joel Baden and John Collins and Ronald Hendel and stuff. And I like those, in my mind, like those are biblical scholars. But I mean, yeah, I guess technically I am. I minored in Hebrew Bible in my PH.D. So I took comprehensive exams on Hebrew in Hebrew. So I mean, like technically I'm a Bible scholar. My major was Assyriology, so Near Eastern studies, just more generally. So I majored in Sumerian, Akkadian, but all the years that I was at Hopkins getting my PhD, I took Hebrew classes. I took like Ezekiel and Genesis and biblical archaeology and all those. I took like ancient inscriptions. So yeah, I mean, I guess it's okay to call me a biblical scholar, but I'm an Assyriologist.
So that you're trying to be humble, but I have no problem calling you that based on this description of not only your academic credentials, but just the fact that specifically what you were doing in teaching Hebrew and then now writing a book where you're going to teach us the Old Testament, or at least the ways in which we can have rational arguments as atheists regarding what the Old Testament actually says. To me, that qualifies you as a Bible scholar. Even though I know you don't want to say that about yourself, I'm saying it for you. And I think all of the people here in the chat would most likely agree with that, because you just got about 15 comments talking about how awesome you are. So don't worry, you don't have to say it yourself. We're saying it for you.
Thank you.
By all means, continue. You were presumably a Christian at one point.
Yes.
When you were doing all this. I don't know any atheists who decide to, you know what, I'm going to go to seminary and then I'm going to get my master's in theology. Like it's not really an atheist thing to say.
Yeah. Not usually, not in my experience though.
Yeah. So talk to us a little bit about that. I know you've probably talked about your deconversion a few times, but really the quick version if you want.
Sure. So like I was a fundamentalist evangelical Christian for 26 years. I grew up in a Christian household. I got saved, I think, when I was 5 or 6. And like I wanted to be a pastor or a missionary my whole life. Went missions trips to Mexico, and did sort of the standard Christian things. And so when I joined the service when I was 17, joined the Air Force, like the first thing I did when I got to my first duty station was start my Bible study, which nobody came to. But it was my life, right? Like every decision.
Were you a chaplain's assistant?
Yes, I was a chaplain assistant
okay,
at Keesler Air Force Base at tech training. And so while I was in, I really wanted to become a chaplain, and so I got my bachelor's degree from. Nice. I finished up my bachelor's. Yeah, I'm sure.
Yeah, and I'm not telling it. So.
But I finished up my bachelor's from Liberty University and got commissioned as a second lieutenant as a chaplain candidate. It was a separate program, and went to seminary. And while I was there, I started actually pastoring a church as an associate pastor out in Virginia. And it was like a fundamentalist evangelical church. And, so I was a chaplain in the local jail, a couple times a week. And so but presenting the gospel, winning souls to Christ, that was who I was. It's what I wanted to do. And so when I finished up seminary, the point was, one of my professors told me, my theology professor actually told me, he said, you need to go for a PhD, because you like research, you like the languages and so on and so forth. So I applied to Hopkins with the same expectations of getting in as I would get into like the astronaut program at NASA, right? Like they were roughly equivalent. I'd get in. That is to say, like I completely did not anticipate getting into Hopkins, and told them that actually when they accepted me, which don't do that.
Yes, I agree.
It raised an eyebrow, like what? But anyway,
yeah, this guy lacks confidence. This guy doesn't think he deserves to be here. Why should we bring him here? Yeah, that's what they're going to say. So,
right? But they had mercy. They had mercy on me, and hopefully it turned out well. But yeah, I was teaching Hebrew, and it was like the full 2-year graduate program at the satellite campus. They needed an extra professor down there, so I became an adjunct. And while I was finishing up my thesis, and I remember talking to, I think it was the dean that I was talking to once I got accepted to Hopkins, and he said, like, that's a very liberal school. Are you ready? And I always tell this story. It's sort of become a thing, but I held up I had my Biblia Hebraica Stuttgart Gensia, my Hebrew Bible in my hand from teaching the class. And I said, I'm going into the lion's den. I held it up, and I'm going to win souls for Christ.
Was that the real reason
that
you chose that? It wasn't because it was liberal.
No,
right?
no.
It was just because of the prestige of
yeah. So my professor at Capitol is a guy named Mark Meyer, Dr. Mark Meyer, and he said if you want to do like Akkadian really well, you need to go to a place like Hopkins. They do it really well. So yeah, that's why I applied. But my first semester there, I remember, I won't mention his name, but a really good friend of mine, that was like in his 3rd year at the time, Hebrew Bible student, who also was an evangelical Christian before. He said, I'll be interested to see how long you last as an evangelical. And I said, oh, you gotta worry about me. He said, all right, yeah. And sure as shit, like halfway through the first semester, it was like.
So is it pretty fair to say that the evangelical denominations are fairly untenable in academia?
No, I mean, it depends on what you mean. If you say like a more fundamentalist approach, a fundamentalist evangelical, yes, it's untenable, I think. So, but there are lots of lots. There are many. I know several very good scholars, excellent scholars, actually,